Most people think you need a big backyard, a large garden bed, or even a dedicated growing space to harvest a decent amount of onions. But what if I told you that you could grow a ton of onions in just one single container? That's exactly what I'm going to show you today. And here's the thing. One of these 5 tips actually goes completely against what most gardening experts will tell you. In fact, when most people hear it, their first reaction is, that can't be right. But stick with me, because it works, and it might just be the game changer your container garden has been waiting for. But before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome to Silver Sprouts Garden. I post simple, practical tips on growing more food in small spaces, and I'd love to have you join the community. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a new video. It's free, and it means a lot to this channel. Now let's get into those 5 tips. And if you've ever planted onions in a pot, done everything you thought was right, and then pulled up a bunch of tiny, sad, disappointing little bulbs at the end of the season, don't worry. You are not alone, and this video might just save your next harvest. Because the truth is, growing onions in a container is not hard. You just need to know a few key things that most people skip over entirely. Welcome to Silver Sprouts Garden, the channel where I show you simple, practical ways to grow more food in small spaces, whether that's a balcony, a patio, a tiny backyard, or even just a sunny corner inside your home. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been here before, great to have you back. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 simple but powerful tips that will help you grow a genuinely impressive harvest of onions from just one container. These are tips I've learned from trial and error, from research, and from just getting my hands dirty and figuring out what actually works in the real world. You don't need a garden. You don't need a lot of space. You just need the right approach. So let's get into it. Tip number 1 is all about choosing the right container, and this one matters more than most people realize. Here's the thing. Not all containers are created equal when it comes to growing onions. The container you choose at the very beginning is going to set the foundation for everything else. Get this right, and you're already ahead of most container gardeners. So what are you looking for? First, you want depth. Onions need room to develop their bulbs underground. So a shallow container is going to limit your results no matter what else you do. Aim for a container that is at least 25 to 30 centimeters deep. That's around 10 to 12 inches for those of you not on the metric system. This gives the bulbs proper room to develop and swell the way they're supposed to. Second, you want width. The wider the container, the more onions you can grow. A wider container also means more growing space, which directly translates to a bigger harvest. A container that is around 40 to 50 centimeters wide or more is a great starting point. I personally love using large round containers or even wide rectangular planter boxes for this reason. Third, and this is non-negotiable, your container must have drainage holes. Onions absolutely hate sitting in waterlogged soil. If water has nowhere to go, your bulbs will rot, and all your effort will be wasted. If you're repurposing an old bucket or tub, just drill a few holes in the bottom. Simple fix, huge difference. The biggest mistake people make with container onions is choosing a pot that looks big enough on the outside, but is way too shallow on the inside. Always check the depth before you buy. A bigger, deeper container means more onions, healthier roots, and a much more satisfying harvest at the end of the season. Tip number 2 is about the soil, and this is where a lot of container gardeners quietly go wrong. When you're growing in the ground, the soil has a lot of room to breathe, drain, and balance itself out naturally. But in a container, you're working with a limited, enclosed environment. That means what you put in that container matters enormously. Onions need a loose, light, and well-draining soil mix. They don't do well in heavy, compacted soil because the bulbs physically struggle to expand and push through dense material. Think of it this way. A bulb growing in heavy soil is like trying to inflate a balloon inside a tight box. It just doesn't have room to grow the way it naturally wants to. Here's what I recommend for the perfect container soil mix for onions. Start with a good quality potting mix as your base. Not garden soil, potting mix. Garden soil is too heavy and dense for containers. Then add in a generous amount of compost. Compost feeds the plants slowly over time, improves soil structure, and gives your onions that rich, fertile growing environment they love. If you have your own homemade compost, even better. If not, a good quality bag compost works perfectly well. You can also add in a small amount of perlite or coarse sand to further improve drainage and keep the mix nice and airy. One thing I want to flag here, don't go overboard with fertilizer at the start. I know it feels like more nutrients equals more growth, but with onions, too much fertilizer early on actually pushes the plant to put all its energy into producing big leafy green tops rather than developing the bulb underneath. And while green tops are great for eating, we want bulbs. So keep it balanced. Compost is usually enough to get things started. The mistake to avoid here is using straight garden soil or heavy potting mixes that hold too much moisture. Soggy soil is an onion's worst enemy in a container. Keep it light, keep it loose, and your onions will thank you. Tip number 3 is the contrarian tip I mentioned at the start, and I want you to keep an open mind here. If you've ever read a gardening book or looked up onion spacing guidelines online, you've probably seen advice like space your onions 20 to 25 centimeters apart to give each plant room to grow a large bulb. And look, that advice isn't wrong. It works. But in a container, you can actually grow your onions much closer together than traditional spacing recommends and get a fantastic result. Here's why this works so well in a container setting. Instead of waiting to harvest all your onions at once at the end of the season, you harvest them gradually as they grow. You start pulling the smaller ones early, while they're still young and green, and this naturally creates more space for the remaining onions to keep developing into larger bulbs. This is sometimes called a progressive harvest or a staggered harvest, and it is one of the most satisfying ways to grow onions in a container because you get to enjoy fresh onions throughout the whole growing season, not just at the very end. Those early small harvests are absolutely magic in the kitchen, by the way. Young onions with the green top still attached are incredible in stir-fries, salads, soups, and pretty much anything else you throw them into. So don't be afraid to crowd your container a little. Sow your seeds generously, let them germinate, and then begin your early harvesting as a natural way of thinning them out. The ones you leave behind will grow bigger and bigger as they gain more space over time. The mistake here is planting just a few onions and then leaving them all to grow to full size without harvesting any early. You miss out on weeks of fresh produce and you don't actually end up with that many onions at the end. Plant more, harvest progressively, and you'll be amazed at what one container can produce. Tip number 4 is about sunlight and watering. And getting both of these right is what separates a good harvest from a great one. Let's start with sunlight. Onions are what I'd call sun lovers. They want full sun, ideally 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight per day minimum. The reason this matters so much is that onion bulb development is actually triggered and driven by daylight hours. More sun generally means better bulb development and a bigger, more satisfying harvest. So when you're deciding where to place your container, choose the sunniest spot available to you. A south-facing balcony, a sunny patio, a bright windowsill if you're growing indoors, wherever gets the most light throughout the day. One of the great advantages of container growing is that you can move your container around to chase the sun if needed. Take advantage of that flexibility. Now for watering. This is where I want you to think about balance rather than routine. Onions need consistent moisture, but they do not like being waterlogged. The goal is to keep the soil evenly moist, not soaking wet, and not bone dry. A good rule of thumb is to stick your finger about 2 centimeters into the soil. If it feels dry at that depth, it's time to water. If it still feels moist, give it another day or two. As the onions get closer to maturity, you can actually ease off watering a little to help the bulbs firm up and cure while still in the ground. The biggest mistake people make with watering container onions is overwatering. Because containers can hold moisture differently depending on the material and size, it's easy to water on autopilot and end up with soggy soil that causes the bulbs to rot from the bottom up. Always check the soil before you water and make sure those drainage holes we talked about in tip 1 are doing their job. Tip number 5 is about harvesting, and knowing when and how to harvest your onions can make a huge difference to both the quantity and the quality of what you end up with. As I mentioned in tip 3, you can start harvesting onions early in the season when they're still small and green. These early harvests are a bonus, fresh, flavorful, and a sign that your container garden is doing its job. But when it comes to the main full-sized harvest, here's how you know your onions are ready. Watch the tops. When the green leafy tops start to naturally fall over and bend down toward the soil, that is your signal. The plant is essentially telling you it's done directing energy into the leaves and is now focused entirely on the bulb. This is a natural part of the growth cycle. It's not a disease, It's not a problem. It's just your onions letting you know they're ready. You might also notice some of the larger onions starting to send up a flower stalk. When this happens, harvest those ones first. They tend to be the most mature plants in the container, and they won't store as well once they've started to bolt. Once you've harvested your onions, don't rush to use them all immediately. Lay them out in a warm, sunny, well-ventilated spot for 3 to 4 days to cure. This drying process hardens the outer skin, which is what allows onions to be stored for weeks or even months rather than going soft within a few days. A simple homemade drying rack or even a mesh tray works perfectly for this. The mistake to avoid here is harvesting all at once without curing them properly, and then watching your onions go soft and spoil before you've had a chance to use them. Take the time to cure them and your harvest will last much longer. And if you follow these 5 tips consistently, choose the right container, use the right soil, crowd them in and harvest progressively. Give them plenty of sun with careful watering, and harvest and cure them properly. You will be absolutely amazed at what just one single container can produce. We're talking a genuine, satisfying harvest of onions that will keep you stocked in the kitchen for months. All from one pot. No garden required. So let's quickly run through those 5 tips one more time. 1. Choose the right container. Deep, wide, and well-drained. 2. Use the right soil mix. Light, loose, and compost-rich. 3. Don't be afraid to crowd them in and harvest progressively. 4. Give them full sun and water consistently without overdoing it. 5. Harvest at the right time, and always cure your onions before storing. Do those 5 things, and you'll be growing a ton of onions in one container, just like I do right here on Silver Sprout's garden. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. It helps more people find this content and helps this little channel keep growing. And if you want to see more simple, practical tips on growing food in small spaces, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. I've got some great videos planned on container gardening, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy growing, everyone. Seedling.